Hello YouTube, I'm going to talk about the new Skaven units and how I think they will affect the Skaven meta, so that by the time the patch hits, we will all be better prepared. So, for starters, let's look at Sniksh, Legendary Lord for the Skaven in the Shadow and the Blade DLC. Let me start off by saying that I think he will be a pretty good Lord in multiplayer, of course in single player as well, but I'm mostly focused on multiplayer. So what is his thing? It's killing characters, and he will be quite amazing at that if he can get his hands on them, because his damage is amazing. He's deceptively tanky with the physical resistance and the slippery and concealment bombs that he can use to slip away. Major weakness though will be the low health pool and weakness to magic. But the way you're gonna want to use Sniksh is either to kill characters that you can get your hands on that are on the ground. He will kill them very quickly, especially with the right support. And he can also debuff enemies around him quite a lot. It won't be easy to get your hands on him. And I think the magic will be something you can work around by just using the concealment bombs until you get close, and then use mostly armies in which you aim to overwhelm and kill enemies quickly before the magic damage is time to pile on, which is really the style I think you should be going for with Sniksh. So do I think he will replace Skrolk as the main lord of the Skaven? I don't think so, but in the rush builds I think he may be a better option. So that's Sniksh. I think I will be pretty good. I don't think people will play him as often as Skrolk, unless Skrolk gets some nerfs. But killing characters and helping Skaven frontline overcome enemies quickly, that's going to be the thing he's good at. And of course he has to kill everything fast, because he might fall to magic damage otherwise, which to me is sort of his only weakness. He is a Footlord, but all the Skaven except the Warlord on the Bonebreaker are Footlord, so it's not like comparatively that's such a bad thing. And with the nets and everything else he has, and units that will support him, I don't think he will be as vulnerable to ganking as other Footlords. Unless, of course, he gets isolated, then I do think he can get terror routed pretty quickly, because he's not immune to psychology. His leadership is not low, but it's not super high either. So I think the way you're going to want to use him is to combine him with the tail slashers to give him that immunity to psychology, and he will buff the tail slashers. He will debuff armor so they can pretty much grind through anything that isn't like monsters or cavalry that's just gonna mow them down with a big charge. And yeah, in that combo Sniksh is going to be pretty good. Now you also have the Master Assassin, which is like a Sniksh light. You can team up with him, and this guy brings some unique things to the table. So Sniksh can debuff enemies and also their leadership. This guy can too, so they can stack that. On top of that, well, if they both start beating on something, we'll die even faster. And this guy will bring something to a Skaven rush army that it's not likely to have in abundance, because you're rushing, you won't have as many ranged units. But this guy has ranged, and he has a ranged debuff, or at least he can debuff enemies at range and make them weaker to being shot, sort of like a witch hunter, and allow lighter Skaven units that might join your rush army, like gutter runners or something along those lines, or night runners, to kill targets that they otherwise wouldn't. On top of that, this guy is pretty good in melee, good at killing infantry. I think the only thing we need to look out for with a Sniksh and the Master Assassin is, well, maybe the regular assassins, which are insanely cost effective, will just beat them point for point in terms of cost effectiveness. But other than that, I think this guy will be pretty good as well. Then we have the Eshin Sorcerer. Now this guy I'm actually pretty excited about. Just like with most of the Skaven units, actually, I'm not the biggest Skaven player. I love watching them. Don't like playing them or playing against them that much. But I think they did a great job with these units, and especially with this guy, because it opens up some very different playstyles from what we're used to seeing from Skaven. For instance, this guy He's a caster, he can do a lot of cool stuff. He's unique in the way that he has stock himself, can stay safe thanks to that, at least for a while. And he actually has quite a few interesting spells. So he can put stealth on units, or stock on units that otherwise wouldn't have it, so they can join your stock Vanguard deployed rush army and just overwhelm the enemy quickly, which is what I think Clan Ashen playstyle, or Skaven with Clan Ashen units and Lord's playstyle, will amount to. And he also has a strong passive, so he's going to reduce the damage enemies do and reduce their speed for a couple seconds anytime he casts a spell. So why is that good? Well, your units aren't really tanky when you use those quick Skaven rushing armies, so any damage mitigation, map-wide especially, that you can do is going to be super useful. Also, they will need to reposition or maybe try to run away from your rat, so any speed debuff they can give will be quite useful. Now, almost all of this guy's spells are useful, I think. He has, for instance, a spell that will blow units away and allow them to rush through without doing damage, but they can just rush through. So you're going to have to look for a part of the line to break, put the spell there, and rush through. If you are playing against it, you will have to make sure you have a secondary line behind that, or a unit that can quickly stop the Skaven from rushing through. But that could be quite difficult. Because, well, they're stocked, you don't really know where they're coming from, do you? So on top of that, there is a net spell on, well, an ability on Sniksh, and I believe, yes, he actually has 2 nets, so this guy has a vortex. If there's a vortex cast by Sniksh, or a net cast by Sniksh, and you put the vortex on them, it's a stationary vortex, it will destroy a unit. So that's pretty good, while not really doing much damage to single entities that are in there. So I could see some sort of hero blob just nuking a unit that gets blobbed around them. Sort of like Ikit Claw does to cavalry, but just on a infantry scale. Now, he also has something that will be quite useful in these Clan Ashen rush builds that I'm anticipating, which is a strong magic missile against armored targets. Because, well, if you're rushing, you're not bringing too many Jezzails, you're not bringing too many Rattling Gunners, because, well, you're rushing, you're not really playing stationary, just want to get to the enemy. Those magic missiles will be able to knock down those targets that otherwise you would need the big guns for. On top of that, this guy actually has decent stats for a caster. He's not tanky by any means, but yeah, I think his spells are just great for what they do, or the playstyle Clan Ashen units encourage. For 2 more reasons. He has 2 debuffs. One, well, actually a buff, which gives armor and missile resistance. So you could sneak up any units, and with the Weeping Blades, they remove any armor the enemy might have. Well, they cut it in half, which is pretty much removing it, in my opinion. And then you give armor to those units as well, like Plague Monks. And suddenly they have armor, and they are kinda have armor piercing, or at least they're piercing armor. Which you're not really likely to face, because who brings armor against Skaven? But still, cutting even a 30 armor unit's armor in half is pretty good. So your Plague Monks, for example, or any other units you use, really will really benefit from having 33 seconds of having plus 60 armor, because not many people bring that much armor piercing against Skaven either. So I think his buffs are good. He has another debuff that lowers leadership a lot. And remember, the first 2 lords already had leadership debuffs. So it's like Doom and Darkness, pretty much. And this guy has one more purpose. So he can break lines in various ways. So he can break maybe 2 parts of the line, one with the 1 spell, one with the leadership spell. But let's say you're playing a Skaven Kite army, which I think will also be more of a option in this patch. He has a spell that reduces enemy speed and melee defense by 40. So 24% speed, 40 melee defense debuff. What does that mean effectively? Well, these units like that come rushing after your Death Runners, they're just going to be slowed, because this guy suddenly pops out of nowhere. They're going to have no melee defense and they're just going to get slaughtered. So Eshin Sorcerer, I see a lot of potential for this guy. It's almost like a better Lord of Shadows. So very useful in guiding armies and rush armies. Then we have the Warp Grinders, kind of a funny unit. Very strange stats, decent armor, almost no leadership, almost no stats. They do have some magic attacks, but very high weapon strength. So with the right buffs and debuffs, they could put that high weapon strength to use, but there's only 18 of them, so I don't see them doing much damage really. But the interesting thing about this unit is it's 600 gold, which is a decent amount, but it's not like a huge investment, and they have 2 nets. Now what people have been doing against Skaven is getting a huge creature in their ranks, and the creature tanks a bunch of shots as it's coming in, but it doesn't die, so the damage is kind of wasted, and then the Skaven just lose because they wasted all their range damage against it. If you can hold that creature down for 13 more seconds, that may be what you need to kill it, and if it's an expensive creature, then it's totally worth it. So I could definitely see like one of these guys in Skaven armies that try to be more defensive. I think that will be a good use for them, even though, well, their stats are obviously not too good, but because the cost isn't too high, I think it'll be fine. Now the unit I'm the most excited about is the Eshin Triads. They will do 2 things. They can be a fast respawn unit, because they're fast and anti-large, against things that are trying to break through your lines. Usually Rat Ogres fill this role, but Rat Ogres don't do too well if it's, for instance, where Skin Wolves? Yeah, Skin Wolves trying to break through, because those are anti-large, or Cold One Knights trying to break through because they're anti-large. But these guys, they're fast enough to respond to that, and they're better against those units. In addition to that, they have stock, so you could be facing a Skaven guiding army and charge your cavalry after them, and suddenly these guys would pop up, and your unit would get slowed by various spells that the Skaven have. Or you would just run straight into them and these guys would slaughter you. Now the thing you do not want to do though is put a bunch of monsters, or put these guys up against monsters, because with that low leadership they're just not going to fight well against monsters. Maybe with some leadership buffs and immunity to psychology from the tail slashers, but that's not something you can guarantee. But yeah, protection for your death runners and fast response unit against anti-large units that try to make it through your lines, that will be the best role for them. And I think they will be very effective at that. Then we have the Death Squad, Visktrin's Death Squad. So these guys, they're an old unit that got a Regiment of Renown. They will be 1150 gold, so I think they will be a little bit too expensive. Now, they could be like an elite unit that fights alongside one of your lords or heroes to really cut through quickly, but I think they're going to be too expensive, because in these rush builds that I was describing, what you want to do is totally overwhelm the enemy. So you need quality troops, but they can't be too expensive, and you're already putting well, quite a bit into heroes the way I see it, because you're gonna have Sniksh, probably Master Assassin, and the Lord. So I wouldn't really use these guys. I don't think they'll be used that much, but who knows, maybe they'll find some other use, just not in the playstyle that I think will be used. Now, on top of that, you have the Mortars, last unit I'll discuss. It's the Poison Wind Mortars, and they're like Globadiers, but they have more ranged. Now, do I think they will be good? Yeah, I actually do. So, the armor piercing is not such a big deal. Skaven isn't the faction you want to bring much armor against, because they'll either negate it, or they'll just shoot through it, or lower it with the various spells and abilities they have. But the great thing about this unit, I think, is, well, first of all, speed, and they're not made up out of artillery pieces that can be sniped too easily. They have a bit of armor, so they're a bit more survivable than your regular artillery unit. But the best thing is the thing you see right where it says missile damage. There's a new icon there, and it basically means that if you hit a unit, it's going to take 10 seconds of damage. Now, why is this great? Well, I'm pretty sure even if you hit only one model, it's going to apply to the whole unit, and it's going to be reapplied with every hit. So you don't need perfect hits to do good damage with this unit. And that is a reason why I could see this unit being picked sometimes. I don't think the magic damage is going to be a big deal, really. But I could see them replacing other Skaven artillery pieces in certain scenarios where you're trying to play defensively as the Skaven. Now, there's also a Deathglobe mortar, which is the Regiment of Renown for this unit. And I don't think this one will be that great, because, as I said, armor is not really used much against Skaven, and the big armor piercing bonus they get compared to the regular Poison Wind mortars is just not such a big deal, because, well, if someone's bringing like Blackguard of Nagorond or something against you, you have other ways of dealing with that, really, mostly melee and armor debuffs. So maybe in some builds these guys will be used, but I don't really think so. I think Skaven have more effective options. One more thing though about the mortars is, because of their arc of fire, on certain maps Skaven could take advantage of that by positioning them behind hills or shooting over trees and not having to worry for retaliation fire or worry about retaliation fire, and then being able to win artillery battles without investing that much into artillery. So, conclusion, I think Skaven will be able to rush better, I think they'll be able to kite better. I also think their defensive builds will really benefit from the Eshin Triads. Now, how are you going to have to deal with that? Well, there's like 3 playstyles that you can come up against. I think most people will still play Skrolk and just play defensively with artillery and things like that. But you have to take into account that they might just rush you with a bunch of stocked units. So what are you going to need against the Skaven? Well, you're going to need to put your Lord in the air as much as possible, I think, and make them fast and nimble so they can dodge, and just don't go in there to fight Sniksh or even Skrull, because unless they nerf the Liber Babonicus, it's usually a bad idea. At some point in the battle you can go and kill them, but going straight up against them where they're strongest is not such a good idea. So you're going to have to make sure your Lord is safe by putting them in the air and keeping them away from anything that can net them or just do a humongous amount of damage to them. You're going to have to scout very well, so preferably with flying units. Why flying units? Well, other units might just get caught out and die really quickly, and you don't want to spread out too much yourself. Now, to deal with the kiting armies, you're going to need firepower as well. So finding a good balance in builds that can take on these 3 Skaven armies that you could face is going to be quite difficult no matter what. But with some adjustments you can at least make sure you're not completely destroyed by one of these options. Now, what I also think you're going to have to do is have some unbreakable units as much as possible and not make a single line, because they'll quickly get through a part of your line if they use Sniksh. Now, for the Skaven, there's one tactic that I want to see someone do, which is taking a Hell Pit and making it invisible with this new Eshin caster and putting some armor and missile defense on it and like doing a big old Hell Pit surprise. That's what I'm looking forward to seeing in this new patch. I think Skaven are going to be really strong. I think we are going to see the tactics I discussed be put to use, but for the most part I think they will mostly do the thing they're used to doing and just do it better than before. But be aware of these new playstyles. If you're the Skaven player yourself, try to take advantage of them, and good luck in the new patch.